From Agerpoint, I'm James Kotecki, and this is The Point Cloud. My guest today is Stan Dotson, a legend in the agriculture space, bringing over 30 years of experience in cutting-edge agriculture, including as the former vice president for digital transformation and IT strategy at Bayer Crop Science. He's helped build the technological foundation of the future we are about to have. He's an Agerpoint advisor, and he's here to help us understand what that future is going to look like. Stan, so grateful to have you on the show.
I'm glad to be here too, James. And wow, what an introduction. But it's my pleasure to be on the Point Cloud. You do such an amazing job with the interviews on the Point Cloud. So I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you so much. I really want to start with what inspired you to get into this industry and get into this space. So the intersection of agriculture and technology, what brought you into this space? What brings you to this point?
Really, it started, growing up on a farm in central Illinois. And then, when I was in school, I always enjoyed science. And so really bringing both farming and science together is what brought me here today. It's following my passions. If you think about agriculture, it's such a meaningful career. I mean, you're helping the world produce the food, feed, fuel, and fiber that it needs in the future, and hopefully doing that much more sustainably. And then, of course, the technology component really makes it exciting. Technology is so innovative. It's constantly changing. And I can't think of really any moment in my 38-year career where I've ever been bored.
When you were a kid, did it seem like farming was a high-tech career? Did you see the science behind it? Or did it start with an interest in farming and then the science tech kind of piece was an aha moment a little bit later on?
No, I didn't see the science behind it at the time. I mean, farming at that point was baling hay and throwing hay bales into a barn. There was nothing science about it at all. But at school, I was fortunate to have some good science teachers. And I think that's where the science component came in. And then it really wasn't until I was in college that I actually put the two together.
You were and I'm going to make sure I get this official title from my notes, Vice President for Digital Transformation and IT Strategy at Bayer Crop Science. Very cool title, very important job. Can you contextualize for us, what's a project that you worked on at Bayer? What's that job all about?
If you think about it, in the early days, actually it was at Monsanto, which Bayer acquired back in 2012, we started looking into this digital transformation, digital opportunity technology platform to introduce it into agriculture. And we started thinking about how can we give farmers digital tools that help them on their farm. But at some point you have to stop and say, if you're going to be the digital leader, you also have to be digitally transformed yourself. And so a lot of my role was actually how do we digitally transform the R&D organization, the manufacturing organization, and our sales and marketing so that we would have digital tools to run our company in addition to then providing them to our growers.
Mm-hmm. Can you help us understand what that looked like at the beginning of the process? How undigital was it before that process started?
A couple examples, going out in the field, you would still take out, sticks like 30 inches long and lay them down and count plants and record them on a digital device, but still still operating very manually, which was labor intensive and very difficult work. I know there are still examples of when we would transfer products between the company and distributors, you would have a computer order that you print out and then fax it over to those distributors. And so there were still many examples of using, 70s technology, 80s technology, and not actually being able to take advantage of, digital connectivity.
And did it feel like a push or a pull or an easy or hard thing to do this kind of digital transformation inside this particular industry? I mean, you talked about growing up, it didn't maybe seem that intuitively scientific or technological at the beginning. I mean, obviously now you can see as a well-educated adult, there's obviously a ton of science behind farming and agriculture that goes back thousands of years. And it's one of the original important businesses where technology is always changing it. But I just wonder, do you feel like there's a particular flavor of the industry that is either more receptive to, more resistant to certain kinds of digital transformation?
That's a great question. And I was able to be part of a number of technology revolutions during the course of my career at Monsanto. Digital was actually interesting. And what was interesting about it is that people individually were adopting smartphones. So they had their iPhones and later their androids. And so they were already becoming digital in their life, and they were demanding that, well, why aren't we more digital as a company? And I think the same going on with farmers, who would have iPhones. So there was this pull that, well, I'm using it personally, why can't we use it in our company? And so the real challenge really was focusing, and picking the opportunities that would have a real valuable impact for either our customers, our growers, and or for the company. And that focus was really, I think, the important thing.
One of the innovative things that you've done in your career is put your name on a number of patents. I think you have dozens of patents that your name is attached to, which is extremely impressive. But how does that kind of innovation actually work? What's the I don't know if secret is the right word, but like what's your framework for innovating and coming up with these new ideas, these new patents?
I think the ideas are actually maybe the easy part. I think what people have to it's people can come up with lots of ideas. Of course, that idea has to have the right timing. If, let's say it's an idea with technology, that technology has to be available. Having an idea of how to use a smartphone wasn't going to be helpful until the smartphone was invented. And so you have to have the right timing. But I think what's really important is that the really big ideas, the ideas that are going to have significant impact in agriculture, they're really not something that an individual comes up with. These are things that a team needs to work on. And so I think if I had to share my perspective, I'd say it's two things. One is that it takes a team to really develop and advance an idea, and it takes a lot of persistence. And, I'm thinking, I can give you a couple examples that I think are really different. So if I think about, part of the time in my career at Monsanto where we were working on biotech approaches to yield like drought tolerance, I was putting my daughter, I think, on the school bus for the very, very first time, as she went off to kindergarten when we started working on drought tolerance. And I think when it was finally introduced in the marketplace, she was actually graduating high school. And so it took almost 12 years, and not just one team, but multiple teams, a team to invent the idea, a team to develop the idea, a team to manufacture, and then actually take it to the marketplace. And so it took multiple teams and a lot of persistence to bring a technology like that to agriculture. But now, interestingly, digital is a whole nother story, right? So you can go from an idea, even an individual can come up with an idea, 2 or 3 different sprints, which is a couple months, and you can be launching that product out in the market and starting to get feedback. And then another thing about digital that I think is really interesting for agriculture. So if you think about ag, you might typically have one field season per year. So you plan, plant, collect your data, harvest, and that's it for 1 year, typically. But if you've got data, in a digital platform stored, you can actually do historical simulations, on an idea. So you take your idea, you simulate it over the last 10 years using that data. And you can actually make a lot of progress without even needing one field season. Now, of course, you still have to get out there and show that it works, but everything is just moving so much faster with digital.
So those are obviously huge advantages with digital, the ability to do those kind of simulations and the ability for maybe a smaller team or even, as you said, an individual to, create something, have an idea, put it out there and start testing it. Is there also a disadvantage to that? In other words, if you have multiple teams of people doing something, it might take a long time, but at the end of it, you can be pretty darn sure that it's a robust thing. If it's digital and if the barrier to entry for kind of creating a digital product is relatively low, you get all these digital products out there, maybe even within the same company or the same unit. And maybe is the challenge there like implementation or time to test it, or, that the end user, the customer is like kind of overwhelmed with all the different options that they have?
I think that goes back to my earlier comment that, one of the real challenges I think in digital is the focus that's required, to identify what is the technologies or opportunity that you're going to focus on and take it out. That if you do everything and it all goes at once, then it can be very overwhelming, I would imagine, for an end user. At the same time, too, putting the tool in their hand, it depends upon what it is. So if it's a tool that helps them collect data off their farm equipment, that can go out really quick, and it can be fully tested and implemented in a really relatively short time for agriculture. Okay, relative to the drought tolerance story I gave you of 12 years. But if you're saying that, okay, we think that this precision technology is going to enhance yield, well, that yield's a function of, a field over time, over multiple years. And so you still have to go out and test those technologies and test those predictions, those algorithms. and say, do they actually work, over multiple environments in multiple years? Because that's what really it takes to be able to measure something as highly variable and environmentally influenced as yield.
So we're talking about the intricacies of this digital revolution, this digital transformation. And as you said, you spent a long time working on this. And now from where you sit, how's it going? Like it's hard to even ask this question because it's so broad, right? But like if we talk
Yeah.
about a process of digital transformation, is it never ending? Is it just an ongoing process that we're always going to be digitally transforming? Have we come a certain percentage of the way? Is that even the right question to
Yeah.
ask? Like, are you happy, optimistic, disappointed? How do you feel?
I'm always optimistic. So that's something you have to know about me. So, but if I think about digital transformation, particularly in agriculture, I still think we're really at a stage where we're just seeing successful examples of digital transformation. So applications that help farmers manage their field, the use of satellite data, use of digital weather feeds, variable rate technology out in the field. So those are some examples of success, and they're being adopted, but still a long ways to go to get them fully adopted over farms. But by and large, I think we're still not digitally transforming in a more integrated manner, and where you've got data connectivity and sharing of information. And I think that's for a couple different reasons. Ag is highly fragmented. There's thousands and thousands of participants in agriculture. And so that fragmented nature makes it, for example, difficult to have the data sharing and connectivity that you need. There's a lot of technical debt in agriculture. So technical debt could be old systems that companies have still and they use. It could be the farm equipment and implements that have been purchased and still are useful life, but weren't manufactured with the digital capabilities. And then agriculture is also by nature a commodity business. And so you don't have always the free cash that you need to do the type of investment you might. So if I thought about for all the progress we're at today, I'd say we're only still 10%. But the good news, though, is that there's 90% to go. So there's a lot more value for digital transformation in agriculture, and it's all in front of us still. So I'm pretty optimistic about where we're going, and there's still a lot more opportunity out there.
Well, let's continue on that thread. What are some specific technologies that you're excited about in the near term? Maybe they're just starting to have their day in the field or just about to kind of start adding some of this additional value that we're hoping for.
Well, back to that point I was making that, things aren't still being adopted in ag, mobile and cloud were probably the first two technologies in digital, that defined, digital. And they came out in 2012, 2014. We're still a long ways from fully adopting mobile and cloud. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's, poor connectivity out in the farms. And so difficult to always have the cloud connectivity you need and/or mobile device connectivity. So there's still adoption even on some of the original digital transformation technologies. Imagery, like I said, there's a lot of application to use of imagery, for example, satellite imagery, drone imagery. Imagery has the highest data content, I think, of any observation that you can take out in the ag space. But there's still going to be more and more opportunities even for imagery, even though that's been now around for a decade or so. But if you think about, to your question, like what's exciting right now, I think it's robotics. You've got the drones and autonomous vehicles. They're exciting for a couple of reasons. One is they bring additional precision to precision agriculture. Two, they're going to address, some of the key labor shortages that we're having in agriculture right now. If you have a machine out in a field, then you're also collecting more data. And that's going to be really helpful, I think, in digital transformations to have that data. And I think ultimately, robotics is going to be much more sustainable way of managing a field than we do today. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and it's an exciting space, and we're seeing some great progress. Another area, that maybe many people won't see is blockchain. It's going to be a behind the scenes technology. If you think about the food supply chain, blockchain really is a data system that really replicates or looks just like the food supply chain. And so you can set up that data in a blockchain and have access to it. And I think it's going to be a data structure that really matches well. And
you mean in the sense of tracking the individual piece of food
items,
throughout the supply chain as it moves through?
Yeah. And as it's manufactured or transformed and data is collected and custodian, who's got custodial custody of it, so that for food safety perspective, for example. And so I think we'll see that. or not, because it'd be behind the scenes. And then, of course, what everyone's talking about now and continues to be really important is this whole area of analytics, which is now turning into this artificial intelligence. I think that's going to be really important with respect to robotics and imagery analysis that we already talked about, but should be able to take some of the more mundane kind of paperwork out of the system too as well. Particularly if ag becomes more regulated, it'll be important for that as well. So, there's plenty of excitement, both from technologies that we've known for a decade now, and then the new ones coming out.
Do you feel like the end users, the farmers, the folks in the field share that same level of excitement? What's the cultural vibe that you're picking up from today's farmers?
I think there's maybe two. One is I feel like there's a sense of mastery. So I feel like, farmers are using these field management applications. They're getting data, they're seeing their field, they're understanding how yield's affected by that. So I think there's a beginning sense of mastery that at some point, in some respects, they're able to use data in ways they haven't done before. And at the same time, though, they're still looking at, I think it's back to one of your earlier questions, like, does this go on forever? So what other digital technology did they need to adopt? Is it being sold to me just for the sake of selling something new, or is it really going to be important that I do this? And so I think that they're looking at technologies and wanting to be sure that they're going to be important, they're going to be valuable, and it's worth their time and effort to look at them, because there is a lot of them coming down right now.
Can you talk to us some more about the opportunities and challenges of data and collecting data and analyzing data and leveraging it for advanced AI applications or other things? Can you give us a snapshot on where we are today?
With data, you can do so many amazing things. And I think people really can see that. I mean, if you've got data, you can identify the best inputs into a field. You can find the best environments to do your production. You can optimize the efficiency of production at every single stage throughout the process. And so data is something that everybody wants and needs to have to be able to make, I think, progress, optimizing agriculture. I mentioned this already, but simulations on historical data sets are going to allow agriculture to move much more faster than they would be able to do if they simply had to, continue to operate with this one growing season per year. Yeah. And I think with data too, you can kind of know what's knowable. So I remember being asked one time when I came in with this algorithm that we developed and the team had developed, and someone asked me, how do you know that's the best approach? And said, well, we took the data and we ran 1 billion simulations. And I don't know that it's the best approach, but it beat the other 1 billion simulations. And so it was definitely the best in 1 billion. So I think we should try it and go forward with that. So,
well, whoever asked that question really teed you up for a great answer there.
Oh, they did. So, but the thing about data is it's hard to get good data, I mentioned earlier, it's often labor intensive to go out and get data. You have to actually be out there in the field to take measurements. Weather can have a big impact. It can prevent you from getting in the field if the field's muddy. Clouds can block satellites from taking observations. So weather has a big impact on getting good data. The data you get is very noisy. You've got environmental noise, you've got weather, which includes weather and soil and other environmental factors. The machinery itself can be noisy. A yield monitor generates very noisy data, so it has to be cleaned pretty carefully before you can use it and make sure it's calibrated. So you get very noisy data. And then when all that data comes in, it's one of the more challenging types of data to manage, which is geospatial data. So the data, is spread out over the entire, landscape of agriculture and has to be geospatially aligned and viewed multidimensionally. And so it's a real challenge to analyze that. Mm-hmm. So there's some real challenges in data in agriculture, but again, the value is there.
When Apple came out with its VR headset recently, I think a lot more people started to become attuned to the concept of spatial computing. And, people are kind of asking, like, what's the point of this VR stuff? What's the killer application? Do you think, that this notion of spatial computing is especially apt when we're talking about ag?
Oh, absolutely. And it's well ahead of when Apple came out with their VR device. I mean, if you think about, agriculture, we used to talk about it as a spatial computing problem. And so if you think about every acre or, every field or every acre as a unit, and that unit, let's say that acre has a given potential to produce food, feed, fuel, or fiber, how do you put a computer on that acre and calculate what is the optimum potential of that acre, for a given year, given whatever about the trends, what's going on, El Nino or La Nina. And so
Yeah.
how do you put a computer on every acre? And so you can imagine just in a 3D model, just in your head, if you could, every acre having a computer being running on there, trying to optimize that acre. I mean, that's kind of the concept where we need to be. And it's very much a spatial computing problem to be able to do that.
Hey, we're talking about data. We're talking about spatial computing, and you happen to be an advisor to Agripoint, our company,
Yeah.
and we deal with some of those issues as well. And
Yeah.
I know I'm being a little cheeky, obviously, but I just love to know a
Yeah.
little bit more about what you think about Agripoint, what attracted you to being an advisor for us, and where you see Agripoint fitting into all these different issues and trends that you talked about.
Well, after retiring from Bayer, I wanted to find some opportunities where I could share my experience and perspective. And I've always enjoyed, like I said, working, with innovators, teams of innovators. And that's been the most meaningful experiences to me. So I was introduced to Agerpoint to be one of the investors. And immediately I realized, okay, what a great group of people that have a passion for agriculture and the commitment actually to bring technology to the farm. And so really, we hit it off immediately and just through personal interactions. And then as I learned more, and the product that got developed was this Agerpoint capture, and it's really a revolutionary technology. And what it does is, that's going to the field. And what it does really, as is it allows you to simply take your mobile device out into the field, and instead of just generating a picture, you can actually generate a 3D image of that area of a field or that row, for example. And so you can simply just scan that row and create what is being called a digital twin. And then once you have that digital twin, then you can take that up into the cloud and you can calculate any type of data that you can imagine off of that. You can, for example, if you were taking an image of a row, you can do stand counts, you can do plant height, you can do leaf number, leaf morphology. Just anything that you can think of can be calculated off that. And so the amount of data that you can now collect, versus just the way it used to be when you would go out, like I said, with the stick and lay it down and take one observation, per length of stick, and then use that to extrapolate what's actually going on. You can capture the whole thing now in about the same amount of time. The thing about that too is the data can be trusted. You know who captured it, when they captured it, where they captured it, and of course you have the actual image, the digital twin that's captured. So very trustworthy, and we can come back to that in a minute. But I like to think about and I'm dating myself, but the old MasterCard, commercial. And so if you think about every field trial in the R&D example, every field trial takes a year to plan and execute. Taking measurements with sticks, is backbreaking work and very error prone. Capturing a digital image with the iPhone, that's priceless, and so and so really amazing technology. Yeah, it is.
I don't know if we can put that exact motto on the website without being sued, but I really appreciate the sentiment. Was there a moment when you first saw this technology demonstrated, or perhaps when you first, used it on a device yourself, where you really had that aha moment? Was there a thought of like, oh, I really wish I had had this back when I was doing X?
Yeah. We were well aware of the technology, the idea of creating digital twins and using LiDAR based, image capture. But it was always with very expensive pieces of equipment, drones or planes carrying it. The fact that you could put it in an iPhone and that iPhone had that LiDAR, I was just immediately, that was the aha moment. iPhone now has a LiDAR unit and you can capture a 3D image. This was just incredible. And as Kevin, the CEO, will tell you, I immediately download the app. And every time I go to the farm, I take 3D images on blueberry plants at my brother's farm or whatever, vegetables at some of my best friends' experiment stations. And it's really exciting to be able to capture that image, bring it up in 3D, train them, have a model trained to be able to calculate, yield or quality or whatever other piece of information. It's just amazing.
We spoke earlier about, maybe there's 90% more of the value of digital transformation that's still on the table, ready to be achieved by folks making different technological advances. What aspect of Agripoint and this kind of spatial computing technology accessible on a mobile phone do you think is most promising for moving us as further along down that line of capturing some more of that value? I guess a much more succinct way of saying that is, what use case are you most excited about with this technology?
Yeah. Well, having been in R&D for a long time, it's a really obvious fit in R&D, like I said, because if you think about field trials that are being run by companies, and there's lots of companies doing it at all stages of development, from discovery all the way through, testing products head to head in farmers' fields. Having this capability out there in the R&D so that you can collect information about that trial and be able to look at the ultimate yield that comes from that, and then be able to look at it and help explain away some of the variables, I think is really important. So R&D is going to be a real easy and early adopter of the technology, which we see. Another example, if you think about it, what this technology allows a company to do is anyone with an iPhone can be in a field and capture, that 3D image in a very trusted manner. And so if you think about where are there opportunities, for that to be an application, certainly this whole area of carbon and sustainability. So you want to be able to go out and measure, accurately the amount of carbon that you might be incorporating into the soil or incorporating into trees, and verify it. This technology could be really important in that measure and verification process. And then, I think, one of the areas that has the most upside for digital transformation left in agriculture really is this whole idea of the food production supply chain. And so how do we get information linked together to be able to more efficiently produce our food? And if you talk to a food company, often what they'll say is, well, my food's actually produced on a farm. And that's kind of a black box to many of these food companies.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so what actually is it's the first step of the entire supply chain. And many of them don't really know what's going on out there in that field. And so if they can go out and have a digital twin, what's being produced in a field, they can start potentially looking at what is their expected yield, what's the expected quality of that food, and start planning in the manufacturing process to be able to optimize then the harvest and logistics of moving it, as well as then, whatever processing that's going to occur downstream. And so having that insight, I think, is going to be really, really important. And it's going to shed a lot of light on what would otherwise be a black box to them.
So it's not just contained on the farm, in other words. It's something that happens way down the value chain, if you will, where the people who are manufacturing the cereal boxes and putting the cereal in them, they also want to know what's going on in the farm 6, 8, 12 months in advance so that they can make all these plans and incorporate that.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not just cereal. I mean, it could be French fry maker, and want to know the potatoes that are being produced. And so lots of examples for that.
Stan, this has been a fantastic conversation. It's really flown by. And I want to give you the final word here in the form of some advice to the next generation. I believe you said you had a 38-year career so far in agriculture, which is phenomenal, and still a lot more exciting things to come, obviously. So what do you tell folks who are interested in following you on this journey in the intersection of ag and tech?
Well, one is, agriculture is such an incredibly meaningful career. So I'm hoping that people don't just follow; they actually join, into agriculture and work in the area of agriculture. It's really important. It's meaningful, and you're making a real difference not only to today but also for the future of this world. Technology has such a tremendous potential to revolutionize how we do agriculture, and we need as many technology passionate companies like Agerpoint that are bringing technology to the farm so that we can bring these breakthroughs to food production. I think the other thing is, remember that, the biggest challenges, like I said, my one learning is the biggest challenges require a team effort. There's no doubt about that. And so, if you're interested in agriculture, find an opportunity you're passionate about, find a team that will challenge you, and to deliver on this, and then just never look back. You won't regret it. And always remain a continuous learner. 38 years later, I'm learning as much as I did when I started, not even more so, because the pace of change in this world is only becoming faster with technology.
Well, Stan Dotson, thank you so much for being a continuous learner and for sharing some of what you've learned with us. We really appreciate having you on the Point Cloud today.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it.
Well, that is our show for now, but there's many more great conversations coming your way. So please subscribe to the show so you don't miss anything, and follow us, like us, rate us, whatever the algorithms are asking for these days. And don't forget to follow us on social media where the conversation continues. From Agerpoint, I'm James Kotecki, and this is the Point Cloud.